In the harsh light of the Arizona Territory, 1879, Eleanor Daniels pressed her forehead against the cool glass of her father's mercantile window, watching dust devils dance across the main street of Promise Creek. Her reflection stared back, a ghost with hollow eyes that hadn't truly smiled since the day she'd found her fiancé in the arms of her cousin, just 3 weeks before their wedding was to take place. "Eleanor, dear, would you mind organizing these shipment papers?" Her father called from behind the counter. His voice carried the same careful tone everyone used with her these days, as if she might shatter like fine china at any moment. "Of course, father," she replied, turning away from the window and the pitying glances of townspeople passing by. At 24, she had become what the town whispered about: the jilted bride, the woman too melancholy to court again, too broken to love. The bell above the door jingled, and Eleanor kept her eyes down, focused on the ledger before her. She'd grown accustomed to avoiding eye contact, tired of the sympathy that inevitably followed. "Mr. Daniels," came a deep voice she didn't recognize. "I've come about the advertisement for help." Eleanor glanced up despite herself. The man stood tall, over 6 feet, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His hat was clutched respectfully in his hands, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Ah, yes," her father said, brightening. "You must be Mr. Forrester." "Yates Forrester," the stranger confirmed with a nod. "Just rode in from Tucson." Her father stepped forward, extending a hand. "Henry Daniels, and this is my daughter, Eleanor." The cowboy's gaze shifted to her, and Eleanor felt something stir within her chest, discomfort, perhaps, at being seen so clearly by someone who didn't yet know her story. She offered a perfunctory nod. "Miss Daniels," he acknowledged, his voice carrying an unexpected gentleness that made her look at him a second time. "Mr. Forrester will be helping with our supply runs," her father explained. "Since your brother left for California, we've been short-handed." Eleanor nodded again, returning her attention to the ledger. She heard her father and the cowboy discussing terms, routes, and payment. When she looked up again, Mr. Forrester was watching her with a curious expression. "Something wrong?" she asked, more sharply than intended. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "No, madam, not at all." Later that evening, as Eleanor helped her father close the store, he cleared his throat in that particular way that always preceded an uncomfortable conversation. "Eleanor, I was thinking. Mr. Forrester will need lodging while he's working for us. Our back room, father, no," she knew exactly where this was heading. "Mrs. Peterson has rooms available at her boarding house." "At twice what we could charge," her father countered. "Eleanor, it's been a year. We can't keep the room empty forever. Thomas isn't coming back." The mention of her brother's name, his absence, another wound that hadn't healed, made her throat tighten. "It isn't about Thomas, it's about propriety." Her father's expression softened. "No one would think twice about a businessman boarding with his employer. Besides, you're hardly one to attract gossip anymore." The words, though not meant unkindly, stung. Eleanor was well aware that the town had moved on from considering her a potential bride. After Benjamin left her at the altar, the whispers had evolved from shocked sympathy to uncomfortable pity. Now, at an age when most women were already mothers several times over, she had become a cautionary tale. "Very well," she conceded. "But he takes his meals separately, and I won't be responsible for his laundry." Her father smiled, relief evident in the easing of lines around his eyes. "Of course, he starts tomorrow." The next morning, Eleanor rose early, as was her habit. She enjoyed the solitude of dawn, when the house was still quiet and she could pretend, just for a moment, that her life had turned out differently. She was stirring oatmeal on the stove when a knock at the kitchen door startled her. Yates Forrester stood on the back step, hat in hand again, saddlebags slung over one shoulder. "Mr. Forrester," she said, surprise making her voice higher than normal. "Father said you wouldn't arrive until 8. Early riser," he explained with a small smile. "Hope I'm not intruding." She hesitated, then stepped aside. "Come in. I was just making breakfast. He entered, filling the small kitchen with his presence in a way that made the space feel both smaller and somehow warmer. Eleanor noticed he moved with a natural grace that belied his size. "Your father mentioned a room," he said, standing awkwardly by the door. "Yes, upstairs, last door on the right. You can leave your things there while I finish breakfast." When he returned, Eleanor had set the table for 3, though her father had yet to make an appearance. She placed a bowl of oatmeal at what had always been Thomas's place. "Thank you, Miss Daniels," Yates said, settling into the chair with careful movements. They ate in silence for several minutes before he spoke again. "Your father tells me you manage the books for the mercantile." Eleanor nodded. "I do. I've always had a head for numbers." "That's a gift," he said. "Never could get figures to sit still long enough in my mind." Something about his self-deprecating tone made her look up. "Yet you calculate distance, wind, and trajectory every time you use that," she said, nodding toward the holster at his hip. Surprise flickered across his features, followed by a genuine smile that transformed his face. "I suppose that's true, Miss Daniels. I never thought of it that way." For a brief moment, Eleanor felt the unfamiliar pull of her own lips trying to form a smile. She quickly suppressed it, returning her attention to her bowl. "How long have you been riding supply routes?" she asked, determined to maintain a professional conversation. "About 5 years now," he replied. "Before that, I worked cattle up in Wyoming Territory." "And what brought you to Arizona?" A shadow crossed his face. "Change of scenery." Eleanor recognized the deflection, the carefully constructed barrier around certain memories. It was a technique she employed herself daily. "Well," she said, rising to clear her dishes, "I'm sure Father will be down shortly to show you the routes. If you'll excuse me, I need to prepare for opening the store." As the days passed, Eleanor found herself increasingly aware of Yates Forrester's presence in their home and business. He was unfailingly polite, competent in his duties, and seemed to have earned her father's approval almost immediately. She observed him from a distance, his patient manner with difficult customers, his quiet strength when unloading heavy crates, the way he always tipped his hat to ladies on the street. A week after his arrival, Eleanor was closing the store alone, her father having left early for a town meeting, when Yates returned from a supply run to the mining camp 20 miles south. "Successful trip?" she asked as he entered, dust coating his clothes and a day's worth of stubble darkening his jaw. "Yes, madam," he replied, handing her a pouch of coins. "They've ordered double for next month. New vein opened up, so more miners coming in." Eleanor recorded the transaction in the ledger, aware of him watching her. "You have beautiful handwriting," he observed. She glanced up, surprised by the personal comment. "Thank you." "My mother was a schoolteacher," he continued, leaning against the counter. "She always said you could tell a person's character by their penmanship." "And what does mine tell you?" Eleanor asked before she could stop herself. Yates studied her face for a moment. "That you value order, precision, that you're careful not to make mistakes." The assessment was so accurate it left her momentarily speechless. When she recovered, she closed the ledger with perhaps more force than necessary. "The store is closing, Mr. Forrester, if you'll excuse me." As she moved to lock the front door, he stepped forward. "Miss Daniels, have I offended you?" "No," she said, not meeting his eyes. "Then why do you always run from conversation?" The directness of his question made her turn to face him. "I don't run from conversation, Mr. Forrester. I simply have no interest in idle chatter." "Is that what you think I'm offering? Idle chatter?" Eleanor felt her heart quicken. "What else would it be?" He took a step closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes. "Maybe I'd like to know the woman whose sadness seems to follow her like a shadow." Her breath caught. What? Your sadness," he repeated softly. "It's there in everything you do, the way you move, speak, even the way you look at people as if you're always expecting disappointment." Anger flared hot in her chest. "You presume too much, Mr. Forrester." "You know nothing about me." "I know something about sadness," he replied, his voice steady, "and I know it's not something you need to carry alone. Eleanor felt tears threatening and turned away quickly. "The store is closed. Good night, Mr. Forrester." She fled upstairs, locking herself in her room, heart pounding. How dare he? How dare this stranger, this man who had been in their lives barely a week, think he could see into her soul? She paced the small confines of her bedroom, agitated by his presumption. Yet beneath the indignation lay something else: fear. Fear that he had seen her so clearly when she had spent a year constructing walls to keep everyone at a safe distance. The following morning, Eleanor avoided Yates at breakfast, leaving early to open the store. She was arranging a display of fabric when Mrs. Holloway, the banker's wife and town gossip, entered with her two friends. "Eleanor, dear," Mrs. Holloway said with the forced brightness that Eleanor had come to loathe, "we were just discussing the social after church on Sunday. You really must attend." "Thank you for the invitation," Eleanor replied coolly, "but I have accounts to settle." "On the Lord's Day," Mrs. Holloway clicked her tongue. "Besides, there will be several eligible gentlemen attending. Mr. Patterson's nephew is visiting from Denver." "A lawyer, I understand." Eleanor felt the familiar constriction in her chest, the pitying matchmaking attempts that had become routine. Before she could formulate a response, the bell above the door jingled and Yates entered. "Ladies," he greeted, tipping his hat. Mrs. Holloway's eyes widened with interest. "Mr. Forrester, isn't it? We were just inviting Miss Daniels to the church social this Sunday." "Is that so?" Yates glanced at Eleanor, noting her discomfort. "I'm sure it will be a fine event." "You must come as well," Mrs. Holloway insisted. "Always room for new faces." "That's very kind," he replied diplomatically, "but I'll be making a run to Fort Whipple that day." After the women left, having purchased only a spool of thread despite examining nearly every item in the store, Eleanor found herself alone with Yates again. "You didn't have to lie for me," she said quietly, rearranging spools of ribbon. "Who says I was lying?" He responded, but when she looked up, the hint of a smile played at his lips. "There's no scheduled delivery to Fort Whipple this week. Perhaps I arranged one." Eleanor sighed. "Mr. Forrester Yates," he corrected gently. "My name is Yates." "Mr. Forrester," she continued pointedly, "I don't need protecting, especially not from well-meaning if misguided attempts to find you a husband," he finished. When she faltered, she flushed. "Yes, that." "And why is that such a terrible prospect? You're young, intelligent, beautiful, because I'm not meant for it," she interrupted, the words coming out more harshly than intended. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." Eleanor retreated to the back room, her hands shaking slightly. Beautiful? He had called her beautiful. When was the last time anyone had used that word to describe her? Before Benjamin, certainly. Before she had become poor Eleanor or such a shame in hushed conversations. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, Yates's words echoing in her mind. Eventually, she rose and wrapped a shawl around her nightgown, making her way quietly downstairs for a glass of water. As she passed the back room, now Yates's room, she noticed light seeping from beneath the door. She paused, about to continue on her way, when she heard a soft sound from within, a melody, hummed low. Without thinking, she knocked gently on the door, the humming stopped, and after a moment the door opened. Yates stood before her, shirt sleeves rolled up, his suspenders hanging at his sides. Eleanor immediately realized the impropriety of the situation and took a step back. "I'm sorry," she stammered. I heard music." "Can't sleep?" he asked, seemingly unconcerned by her appearance at his door in the middle of the night. She shook her head. "I was getting water." He studied her for a moment. "Would you like to come in? I was just writing a letter." Every instinct told Eleanor to decline, to retreat back upstairs. Instead, she found herself nodding. His room was sparse but neat. A small oil lamp illuminated a sheet of paper on the desk, half filled with his surprisingly elegant handwriting. "To family?" she asked, nodding toward the letter. "My sister," he confirmed. "In Denver." Eleanor hovered awkwardly just inside the door, suddenly very aware of her state of dress. "What were you humming?" A faint smile crossed his face. An old lullaby my mother used to sing. When I can't sleep, it sometimes helps to remember it." "It was lovely," she said softly. Silence fell between them, but strangely it wasn't uncomfortable. Finally, Eleanor spoke again. "I should go back upstairs." Yates nodded. "Miss Daniels," he said as she turned to leave, "if you ever want to talk about it, whatever it is that keeps you awake, I'm a good listener." Eleanor paused, her hand on the door frame. "Why?" she asked, turning to face him. "Why do you care?" His expression grew serious. "Because I know what it's like to carry a burden no one else seems to see." For a moment, Eleanor was deeply tempted to unburden herself, to tell this quiet, observant man about Benjamin, about the humiliation, about how it had changed her. Instead, she whispered, "Good night, Mr. Forrester," and slipped back into the hallway. As spring warmed into early summer, Eleanor found herself watching Yates more closely. She noticed the small kindnesses he performed without drawing attention to himself, helping Mrs. Findlay with her groceries, slipping candy to the Martinez children when their mother wasn't looking, staying late to help her father reorganize the storeroom. One afternoon, as thunderclouds gathered on the horizon, Eleanor was alone in the store when Sheriff Taylor burst in, his face grim. "Eleanor, we need bandages and alcohol. There's been an accident at the mill." That news saw they brought in young Jenkins got his arm caught. Her heart raced as she quickly gathered the requested supplies. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough," the sheriff replied grimly. "Doc Wilson's out at the Carson place for a birthing. We've sent a rider, but—" "I'll bring these right away," she said, packing everything into a crate. "I'll take them," came Yates's voice from the doorway. He must have just returned from a supply run. "You stay here, Miss Daniels." Before she could protest, he had taken the crate and followed the sheriff out into the gathering storm. Hours later, rain pounding against the windows of the mercantile, Eleanor paced anxiously. Her father had returned and assured her that staying open was unnecessary. No one would venture out in such weather, but she insisted on waiting for news. When the bell finally jingled, Eleanor looked up to see Yates, soaked to the skin, his shirt stained with blood that wasn't his own. "How is he?" she asked immediately. "Alive," Yates replied, removing his dripping hat. "Lost a lot of blood, but Doc got there in time. They think he'll keep the arm, though it won't be the same." Relief washed over her. "Thank God." Yates ran a hand through his wet hair. He was asking for his mother the whole time, couldn't have been more than 19. Eleanor noticed then that beneath his composed exterior, Yates was shaken. Without thinking, she moved to the stove where she kept coffee warm and poured him a cup, adding a splash from the medicinal whiskey they kept for emergencies. "Here," she said, pressing it into his hands. "You're chilled through." His fingers brushed hers as he accepted the cup, and the contact sent an unexpected warmth through her. "Thank you, Eleanor." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it hung in the air between them. "You should change out of those wet clothes," she said, stepping back. "I'll close up the store," he nodded, taking a sip of the fortified coffee. "You're kind despite what you want people to believe." Eleanor busied herself with the ledger, avoiding his gaze. Anyone would do the same. "No," he said firmly, "not anyone." That night, Eleanor dreamed of Benjamin for the first time in months. But instead of the recurring nightmare where she stood alone at the altar while the town watched, this time she saw him clearly, his handsome, weak face, his easy smile that had hidden so much selfishness. In the dream, she turned away from him, walking not toward emptiness but toward something else, something undefined but warm. She woke with the first light of dawn, feeling strangely lighter. At breakfast, she found herself speaking more than usual, asking Yates about his experiences on the supply routes, listening as he described the changing landscapes, the people he'd met in isolated homesteads and mining camps. "You should see the desert after rain," he was saying, his eyes bright with genuine enthusiasm. "The whole world transforms overnight, flowers you'd never believe could exist in such a harsh place." "I've never been that far from town," Eleanor admitted. Something in her tone made him look at her more closely. "Would you like to?" "What?" Would you like to see it? I'm making a run to Cactus Springs tomorrow. It's an easy trail and the Joshua trees should be blooming after the rain. Eleanor hesitated. It wouldn't be proper. Your father could come too, Yates suggested, though she detected a hint of disappointment in his voice. Before she could respond, her father entered the kitchen, yawning. What's this about me? Eleanor explained Yates's invitation, expecting her father to dismiss the idea outright. Instead, he looked thoughtful. Actually, that's not a bad notion. Eleanor hasn't been out of town in too long. He turned to her. You used to love riding, remember, before? He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to, before Benjamin, before everything changed. I'll have too much work at the store, she protested weakly. Nonsense, her father countered. Mrs. Peterson's daughter can help for a day. The girl needs the experience anyway. Eleanor looked between the two men, realizing she was outnumbered. I suppose I could go. The next morning dawned clear and perfect, the storm having scrubbed the sky to a brilliant blue. Eleanor dressed in her riding skirt unused for over a year and slightly loose now and a practical blouse. She braided her hair tightly and donned a wide-brimmed hat to protect her fair skin from the sun. When she descended the stairs, Yates was waiting, and the appreciation in his eyes when he saw her made her cheeks warm. Ready, Miss Daniels? He asked, his voice carrying a note of something she couldn't quite identify. Yes, she said, surprised to find she meant it. Yates had arranged for 2 horses from the livery, his own sturdy gelding and a gentle mare for Eleanor. They set off just as the town was coming to life. The supply wagon left behind in favor of saddlebags that carried their lunch and the small packages for delivery. As they rode beyond the town limits, Eleanor felt a strange sensation spreading through her chest, a lightness, a freedom she hadn't experienced in so long she'd almost forgotten it existed. All right, Yates asked, noticing her expression. She nodded, unable to put the feeling into words. They rode side by side when the trail permitted, Yates pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of his previous journeys. Eleanor found herself laughing at his tale of being chased by an angry turkey that had escaped from a homesteader's yard. I've never heard you laugh before, he said, the observation catching her off guard. I don't usually, she admitted. Not anymore. He was quiet for a moment, then said softly, It's a beautiful sound. The simple compliment touched something deep within her, and Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them away quickly, focusing on the trail ahead. By midday, they had reached a small plateau overlooking a vast expanse of desert in full bloom. Yates helped her dismount, his hands strong and sure at her waist, lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary. It's breathtaking, Eleanor whispered, gazing at the landscape painted in unexpected colors, the soft purple of lupine, the brilliant orange of poppies, the delicate white of desert lilies. Like I promised, Yates said, standing close beside her. Beauty in the most unlikely place. They spread a blanket in the shade of a Joshua tree, its bizarre form reaching toward the sky like a supplicant. Yates unpacked a lunch of cold chicken, bread, and apples while Eleanor poured coffee from a thermos. As they ate, a comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the occasional call of a hawk circling overhead. May I ask you something, Eleanor? Yates finally said, using her given name again, this time with a deliberate gentleness. She nodded, somehow knowing what was coming. What happened to make you close yourself off from the world? Eleanor looked out across the desert, gathering her courage. His name was Benjamin, she began, the words coming easier than she expected. We were to be married. I thought he loved me. The day before our wedding, I found him with my cousin Margaret. Yates remained silent, allowing her to continue at her own pace. The whole town knew within hours, she went on. Everyone had an opinion. Some blamed him, some blamed her, some, her voice caught, some even blamed me. Said I was too serious, too concerned with books and business to keep a man's interest. That's absurd, Yates said, his voice tight with anger on her behalf. Eleanor shrugged, the gesture belying the pain she still felt. After that, it seemed easier to become what they already thought I was, the jilted woman, too damaged, too sad for love. Yates moved closer, not touching her but near enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "Eleanor, look at me." Reluctantly, she turned to meet his gaze. "What happened to you was cruel, but it doesn't define you, it never did." "You don't understand," she whispered. "After a while, the story people tell about you becomes the truth. I became that sad, broken woman." "No," he said firmly, "you let them believe that." "But the woman who laughed with me today, who helped that young mill worker without hesitation, who manages her father's business with such care, she's not broken. She's extraordinary." Eleanor felt something crack inside her, a wall beginning to crumble. "Why are you saying these things to me?" Yates reached out slowly, as if approaching a wild animal, and took her hand in his. "Because from the moment I saw you, I recognized something in you that called to me. A sadness, yes, but also a strength that you've forgotten you possess." "I don't know how to be any other way anymore," she confessed, tears threatening again. "You don't have to know right away," he assured her. "But maybe you could start by allowing yourself to feel something other than sorrow, maybe even joy." His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand, and Eleanor felt a shiver that had nothing to do with fear. "And what about you?" she asked. "What sadness are you carrying?" A shadow passed over his face. "Another time, perhaps," Eleanor nodded, understanding his reluctance. "We should deliver the packages before it gets too late." They packed up their lunch and continued to Cactus Springs, a small settlement consisting of a few hardy families. Eleanor watched as Yates interacted with the residents, noting the respect he showed to everyone from the grizzled old miner to the young Mexican woman who ran the tiny postal office. On the ride back to Promise Creek, they spoke of lighter things, books they had read, places they hoped to see. Eleanor felt something unfamiliar building within her, something that might have been hope. As the weeks passed, Eleanor found herself changing, slowly but surely. She began greeting customers with a small smile instead of a solemn nod. She accepted an invitation to tea at Mrs. Peterson's. She even ventured to the church social, though she stayed only briefly and remained at her father's side. Yates, for his part, seemed to bloom in response to her gradual awakening. He spoke more freely about his past, his childhood in Missouri, his years working cattle drives, the sister he'd helped put through teaching college. But he remained reticent about whatever had brought him to Arizona territory, and Eleanor didn't press, respecting his privacy as he had respected hers. One evening, as Eleanor sat on the back porch watching the sunset, Yates joined her, settling into the chair beside hers. "Beautiful night," he observed. She agreed, then added hesitantly, "I've been thinking about reopening the lending library at the store. It was my mother's project, but after she died, well, it seemed too much effort." "I think that's a fine idea," he said, his smile warm in the fading light. "What made you decide?" Eleanor considered the question. "I suppose I remembered how much joy it brought her to share stories with others. And maybe it's time I tried to find joy again, too." Yates's hand found hers in the gathering darkness. "Eleanor," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "there's something I need to tell you." She turned to him, heart suddenly racing. "What is it?" He took a deep breath. "I received a letter today from my former employer in Tucson. They want me to come back to manage their operations." Eleanor felt her world tilt. "Oh," she managed, that's wonderful news." "Is it?" he asked softly. "Of course, it's an opportunity for advancement." "Eleanor," he said, his hand tightening on hers, "I don't want to go, not unless—" "Unless what?" she whispered, hardly daring to hope. "Unless you'll come with me, as my wife." The words hung in the air between them, momentous and terrifying. Eleanor pulled her hand away, standing abruptly. "You don't mean that," she said, voice shaking. Yates stood too, facing her. "I've never meant anything more in my life. Why would you want someone like me, someone the whole town knows is damaged goods?" "Is that what you think?" he asked, incredulous. "Eleanor, you're the strongest, most compassionate woman I've ever known. The way you survived what happened to you, the dignity you've maintained despite their whispers, it only made me admire you more. You deserve someone whole, she insisted. What I deserve, he said firmly, is the chance to love you, to show you every day that your sadness isn't something to run from. In fact, he stepped closer, your sadness is my reason to stay. Eleanor looked up at him, tears spilling onto her cheeks. What if I can't be what you need? All I need is you, he said simply. Just as you are, the rest we'll figure out together. In the soft glow of twilight, he lowered his head, giving her every opportunity to turn away. Instead, Eleanor raised her face to his, and when their lips met, she felt something bloom inside her, something that had been dormant but never truly dead. When they parted, she whispered, I don't know if I can say it yet. The words. You don't have to, he assured her. I'll wait until you're ready. Eleanor took a deep breath, gathering her courage. But I think I could learn to love again, with you. Yates smiled, the joy in his expression so pure it made her heart ache. That's all I ask for, a chance. 2 months later, on a clear autumn morning, Eleanor Daniels became Eleanor Forrester in a small ceremony in Promise Creek's church. The town that had once whispered about her sadness now marveled at her transformation, the way she smiled, the brightness in her eyes when she looked at her husband. As they prepared to leave for Tucson, Eleanor stood in the mercantile one last time, running her fingers over the now restocked shelves of the lending library she had revived. Ready? Yates asked, coming to stand beside her. Almost, she said, reaching up to touch his face. I just wanted to say something first. He waited, patient as always. I love you, she said, the words no longer frightening but liberating. I love you, Yates Forrester. His smile was brighter than the Arizona sun. And I love you, Eleanor Forrester, always will. As they stepped out into the street, Eleanor didn't look back at the town that had defined her for so long. Instead, she looked forward to the desert that bloomed after rain, to the man beside her, and to the life they would build together, where sadness was not forgotten but transformed into something beautiful, something worth staying for.